What's going on, everybody? Kevin Cole here, your humble host. This is the Friday Unexpected Points weekly wrap-up / take some questions, have solicited some questions in advance, strictly from the paid subscribers, and this podcast will also fade out at a certain point, a decent point into it for the non-paying subs, but you're going to get a lot of stuff there, whether you're paying or not, if you're on the Unexpected Points podcast channel. And of course, if you're watching live on YouTube, I will be taking questions there. If you want to drop some into the comments, if you want to preface it by putting Q&A on there, that sometimes that can help me sort through if people start arguing back and forth about, whether or not Joe Burrow is going to dominate the NFL for the next decade or not. Which brings me quickly into one of the more tilting things of this week. And I will say that this is going against one of my core tenets, one of my core philosophical tenets here, which is don't let people you disagree with and what they're saying, the overconfident, evidence-less or lacking in evidence opinions that people have, don't let that dictate everything that you're thinking and saying and the points that you're making. But people are getting pretty crazy when it comes to the Cincinnati Bengals and Joe Burrow going into this week. And it's a little bit weird for me because last season, through the end of the season, through most of the playoff run, I was more negative about the Bengals. They stuck it to me week after week. Although the way they were doing it with their defense playing really well, honestly, was the biggest factor. I mean, Burrow was good. The defense played really well. Sneaky co-MVP for the Bengals was Evan McPherson, who was just nailing 50-yard kicks left and right the entire time. The manner in which they did it maybe wasn't quite matching up with the narrative and Joe Burrow and all that sort of stuff. Now, going to this week, we've just gone Mach 10. I don't think the Mach 10 is even a thing, but that's the speed that we're flying in with these Joe Burrow and Bengals takes. I've heard multiple times the exact phrase, dominate the NFL for the next decade, talking about Joe Burrow and the Bengals. And it's like, guys, I know it gets boring to put the same person on the top of the pedestal of who the greatest quarterback is. We got a little bored in the offseason. Some people, I've heard multiple places, people put Josh Allen number one over Patrick Mahomes because Allen had that really dominant run in the playoffs. I mean, they lost to Mahomes in the playoffs, but he was better efficiency-wise in that game, and he was nearly perfect the week prior to that against the Patriots in the wild card game. And he'd been pretty good the last couple of games of the season. Now, he had some rough stretches during the season last year, Josh Allen. And Mahomes had some rough stretches too, but overall, I think Mahomes was even still better last year. Yet some people, you just get bored. You're just like, let's put Josh Allen as the number one guy. Now, primarily because of last week's results, although it's been a very strong second half of the season for Burrow, now Burrow's that guy that people want to throw in there with Patrick Mahomes. And I did a very unanalytical thing here because I was tilting, basically, hearing all of this Bengals and Burrow talk. And I just put out there some career accolades / how many times they've been to the Super Bowl, they've won the conference championship, how many times they've won the Super Bowl, how many times they've gone to the Pro Bowl. I know everyone hates the Pro Bowl, but still, we have 5 for Mahomes every starting season, 1 for Burrow. Second team All-Pro. Burrow does not have a second team All-Pro. I mean, this season he was not second team All-Pro. It was Jalen Hurts, with Mahomes being the first team All-Pro. But Mahomes does have 1 second team All-Pro. I believe it was 2019 when Lamar Jackson. No, was it 2019 or was it last year? It was probably last year. Or one of the years for the Rodgers MVPs. And then so Mahomes has 1 of the second team. He has 2 now first team All-Pros. He will win his second MVP because the same exact AP voters who voted on first team All-Pro, 49 of 50, giving it to Mahomes. They're the same voters for MVP. So, he's going to get it. Burrow tied with Josh Allen for third in the voting behind Jalen Hurts this year. But again, not enough to get a selection there. So, and I pointed to at the top, and this is the little bit, if you want to say it's deceptive, because Mahomes has had 5 starting seasons in the NFL, and Burrow's only had a few because Burrow started at much older age. And of course, he got injured in his rookie season, but it wasn't like he was lighting it up well enough. He was not going to compete with Herbert or Justin Jefferson even for Rookie of the Year that season. But I was pointing out also that there's a 1-year age differential. Technically, it's a 15-month age differential here. So only a 15-month age differential, even though Mahomes' first season where he started, I mean, he came into the NFL in 2017. So he came in 3 years before Joe Burrow was drafted into the NFL in 2020 because of transferring to Ohio State and all those sorts of things. He was a bit older going on there. So I just think it's a little bit weird to say one guy who's only 15 months older than the other guy is not going to be the primary person to say this is the number 1 quarterback in the NFL after winning the MVP this very season. This season, he's the MVP. We're not talking about like the past or anything like that. This season, he's the MVP. And maybe you don't trust AP voters, but he's going to get 49 out of 50 votes. He's going to lead the league in EPA per play, which aligns with MVP nearly all the time. So it's not like our common perceptions are that far off. It's not like it's just people looking at TD-INT ratio or something like that. It aligns with the most important stats. So, Mahomes is still that guy. Everything other than PFF grading. And just to put into context, and I've done this plenty of times before, the PFF grading, I think it misses out on some key aspects of quarterback play, mostly sack taking, that can hurt your value and hurt your team's chance of winning a lot more than what happens in the PFF grading. So if that was a bigger contribution to PFF grading, I have a feeling that Burrow wouldn't be, I think he was second this year behind Allen, and he was first last year. He'd probably be a little bit lower. He'd still be higher than Mahomes last year, probably, because Mahomes struggled quite a bit there. But, there's a lot that Mahomes does outside of what's graded as far as mostly grading throws when we're talking about PFF grades. So Burrow may look better throwing the ball some of the time, purely throws. But I think overall process and everything that Patrick Mahomes, we're going to put him on a different level. It's especially shocking after Mahomes had that ankle injury and had that miraculous, plays near the end, and everyone was like going crazy about him. Then a day later, Burrow does what he does and he becomes that guy. What's especially insane to me about some of this talk, again, I like Joe Burrow, but I got to talk about this a little bit. Is this idea of, I also hear these things like, Joe Burrow just won't let him lose. Joe Burrow, you can't beat Joe Burrow. It was only the week before in the wild card game against Tyler Huntley that the Bengals almost, the Ravens almost tied the game on a last second play if he would have been caught in the end zone. And they got a 98-yard fumble 6. It was a 13-point EPA play, a 13-point swing in EPA, that play. And then the Bengals, the Bengals probably are more likely to lose than not if they don't get that play against Tyler Huntley just the week before. But that's like completely erased out of people's minds. So anyway, I caused a little stir. Some people going back and forth on it, which I think is important. Head-to-head stats for quarterbacks, like, well, what are we doing here? They don't line up against each other. What does it matter? They're playing against the other team's defense. Why does it matter Joe Burrow's stats versus Patrick Mahomes in the same game? Literally no relevance when it comes to comparing the two quarterbacks, or no additional relevance to just any other game against any other team, right? But anyway, if the Bengals win, which they very, very much can do, although I think they're being a little overrated coming into this game, we'll hear about it from the Burrow stands. And I'll have 2 long weeks to deal with everyone saying that Joe Burrow is the best quarterback in the NFL. Let's talk about some more stuff that happened this week. If you saw the podcast with Josh Hermsmeyer that came out yesterday, I love talking to Josh. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. I especially love talking to Josh because it's so funny how he sometimes doesn't know. I mean, I'm not an expert on NFL rosters. Okay. Like if you quiz me on, who's the Sam linebacker for, the the Panthers or something. I'm like, I don't know. I'm not quite sure sometimes what's going on here. But for Josh, sometimes he won't know who the offensive coordinators are. He won't know who other people are. So I gave him a hard time about that. But anyway, as part of that conversation, we talked about some of the new stuff. So I already have some opinions out there on Hackett. So you can listen to that. Opinions are kind of like I don't have an opinion, honestly. And then the other thing, other than I think people overplay this Aaron Rodgers angle. Like teams shouldn't at least just be hiring someone to have a higher possibility of getting Aaron Rodgers, because I don't think Rodgers even knows what Rodgers is going to do right now. So I doubt they have some extreme insight that Hackett's going to help with him coming there. But he's definitely more well-suited for a coordinator than a head coach. The other news, though, that came out afterwards was Frank Reich becoming the head coach of the Carolina Panthers. This is an interesting one for me. This also there's some influence can be lent from my research that I've done, trying to be a thought leader out there in the Substack streets, where I did this research about what makes a good head coach and then looked at it even further. And one of the points of what makes a good head coach was research that is by Andrew Healy, friend of the pod, I believe. Actually, I don't know if he's been on the pod before, but I've talked to him a bunch of times. He works as a VP of strategy for the Browns. Prior to that, he did writing for Football Outsiders. He was a professor of economics at Pepperdine University. And as part of the work that he did, even before that, for Football Perspective, on that site, back in 2013, he wrote an article about coaching hires, looking at what did outperformance in DVOA, either offensively or defensively, if we're looking at coordinators, or overall, if we're looking at head coaches. Prior jobs, what did that tell us about future jobs? Basically, they found a slight correlation between if a coach is better beforehand, they're more likely to perform well in the head coaching job. But when you restricted it to just looking at coordinators, not looking at previous head coaches, the relationship completely went away. So offensive, defensive coordinators, no matter how well they outperformed, it did not really indicate that they would be a better head coach. So, DeMeco Ryans is the guy now who's going to be coming out of San Francisco. He's probably going to get the Texans job, I guess. There's talk about him being the number one guy for the Broncos job. He's going to get one of those two jobs. Fantastic defense. That in and of itself doesn't mean he's going to be better than if it was a defensive coordinator who was coaching the 10th best defense instead of the best defense in the NFL, like the San Francisco 49ers. Same thing on the offensive side of the ball. Now, there is some selection bias in this, in that you can't definitively rule out performing well as a coordinator doesn't matter, because you're not going to get a head coaching job unless you performed well as a coordinator, right? No one's looking around and saying, oh, I don't know. Well, let's look at the bottom of the table here for offensive performance, and let's go pick out that offensive coordinator and make him our head coach. First-time head coach. It just doesn't happen, right? So for that matter, we are looking at a selected subset of offensive coordinators and defensive coordinators who are all probably coordinating top 10 units. So in that way, it may hide the signal that comes from being a good coordinator or a good position coach. But generally, it's tough to see. It's just the relationship was much stronger, and prior performance correlated and projected forward about 70% to future performance for second-time head coaches, or fourth-time head coaches, if you want to use that. So I use that information to look at different guys, and Frank Reich, being one of those guys, looked pretty good. I mean, he didn't have the longest tenure with the Colts, but when he came in there, and remember, there's the whole Josh McDaniels thing, right? Like, McDaniels was supposed to come in, then he dropped out, then Reich came in, and he had Andrew Luck when he first got there. Then Andrew Luck was gone. Then he had Jacoby Brissett out of nowhere to put him in there. Then he had Phillip Rivers the next year. Then he had Carson Wentz the next year after that. Then he had Matt Ryan, and everything went to shit in 2022. Reminds me a lot of Doug Peterson in some ways, which is, they're related, of course. He was on Peterson's staff. There was always there was this weird thing after the Super Bowl when everything went to hell for Peterson, that it was like, oh, Frank Reich's really the important guy and Peterson's not. I mean, come on, guys, let's calm down here. But it reminds me of that situation a lot, like outperformance based upon what they did the first few years. I've seen people saying that Reich's performance was mediocre there. No. I mean, even though we had Andrew Luck, I mean, they went to the divisional round, I believe, and lost to the Chiefs when he was there in 2018. And that was a good team. I mean, Andrew Luck's efficiency got really, really strong, stronger than what we had seen before. And it was done in a manner also which was going to keep him healthier. Time to throw went down, ADOT went down, sack rate went way, way down. It was keeping him healthy and was being efficient and was kind of matriculating the ball and with these chunks down the field and was much more friendly to him. I mean, he did a decent job with Jacoby Brissett. Phillip Rivers was a top 10 EPA per play quarterback for the Colts. Carson Wentz had pretty good EPA numbers, even though he didn't play very well. Had pretty good EPA numbers there too. And, the Matt Ryan situation, I mean, Ryan wasn't playing well, but at the same time, it sounds like from reporting that Jim Irsay was the one who said this guy needs to be benched. So it was actually even taken out of his hands a little bit there. Now, Reich pushed for Wentz to come, so he's probably not good on necessarily with those types of personnel decisions. I mean, I'm generally for separating that from coaching. So in Carolina, hopefully that's the case. But there's nothing to say that Reich isn't going to be a great head coach, in my opinion. I mean, he could be bad, of course, just like anyone could be. But most of the signs that we have on the outside point to him being really, really good. And then, of course, the complicating factor when it came to Carolina is the fact that Steve Wilkes is there. And, already there's talk about lawyers and the suit that he has with the larger Brian Flores suit, the fact that he wasn't being hired there. I mean, I don't know. I think there are a lot of troubling things that happen when it comes to an old boys network and, scratching each other's backs and friendships and relationships that come into play that end up excluding Black coordinators or former head coaches for getting more jobs. That definitely happens. This particular hire, though, I don't think you can say it. I think Reich is supremely qualified. And then Wilkes, at the same point in time, it looks like he did well. But finishing a season 6-6, it's fine. It's fine. The Panthers team is okay, though. And he got pretty good performance from, believe it or not, from Sam Darnold this year to come in there to kind of help boost in that track there at the end of the season. So he did a fine enough job. But it's just like last year, I wouldn't have said, oh, we got to hire Bisaccia for the Las Vegas Raiders because they finished out the season and went to the playoffs and everything else there. No, you don't overweigh a handful of games, especially you don't overweigh that when they were not even there for the offseason to build everything and to put everything together. They get their imprint a little bit less on it. I think the Panthers were a pretty decent team, vastly underperforming. So he kind of got them back up to how they should have been performing. I don't know if he got them to outperform necessarily how good they were. Now, the troubling one is going to be, and I assume we're probably T-minus 3 or 4 days away from hearing that Jeff Saturday is going to be the head coach hire for the Indianapolis Colts. That one is the one you should be worried about. I know Wilkes isn't a direct competitor for that job. I don't believe he's interviewed there. But obviously, to fulfill the Rooney Rule, they're going to have interviewed some Black head coaches or former head coaches or coordinators. That's the one that's going to be the problem. Because all indications are Jim Irsay loves him some Jeff Saturday. Just loves him. Essentially no coaching experience other than some high school coaching. Brought him in. They stunk. Again, I wouldn't outweigh, how bad they were during the season. I wouldn't say that disqualifies him coming in as an interim head coach and being bad, but he's just not qualified in the first place. And he's just going to hire him anyway. So it's almost like a farcical process, the whole hiring process. At least it's what it sounds like. Now, I could be wrong. Could have egg on my face next week that it doesn't end up happening. But it sounds like Irsay's driving the bus there. And let's face it, like, what's the downside for him to get a bad news cycle when he hires Jeff Saturday? And then everyone forgets about it after a while. And maybe it comes back up again if the Colts are awful this year. They're probably going to try to draft a quarterback, so that'll be the main story for them this season. That's the type of hire that I would look at that says there's nothing in at least my research, my data. You just don't even have a lot to go on when we're talking about being able to find out references, how they react to certain situations. Reich on the public stuff we've seen from Reich, very, very good situationally, good at timeout usage, good at time management, good at fourth down decisioning, all that sort of stuff, good at early down pass rates, things like that. So there are lots of things, the few things we can point to, and good reviews from players and others there. Don't really have anything on Saturday, so it's going to be really, really tough to judge what that type of hire will be. All right. Should I dig in right now? Yeah, let's go ahead and dig in. Let's dig into some of these questions now. I'm going to look here. Okay, I got some Q&A on here. Okay, so if you want to drop any more Q&A in the live stream here, I will get to those, but I'm going to get to a couple of questions that I got, which unfortunately I sent it out a little bit too late. I sent out something soliciting questions to the paid subscribers on here on the Substack. I did get a couple though. So let's go to Max first. Actually, you know what? Max said this is going to be a long answer, so I'm going to do this 1 second. Let's go to the first one here. Where did it go? Okay, the first one here is from Samuel. It says 2 potential questions for the live stream. First, what are your thoughts on a veteran QB as the last piece to a successful team? How does this fit into the team building and contention windows? Relevant this year with Carr, Brady, and possibly Rodgers available. Last year, Broncos. This year, Jets are prime examples of narratives that you just need a competent veteran quarterback to make the playoffs. It can work, see Brady Bucks, but maybe has mixed success in other circumstances. What generally isn't discussed: ceiling versus floor, fit into scheme, limitations of contract, value of alternatives. X didn't work, so you need to do Y, all that sort of stuff. Okay, let's talk about it. So it depends on the lens through which we're going to look at this. Are we looking at it through an ownership lens? Are we looking at it through a fan lens? Are we looking at it through a coaching lens? Are we looking at it through a GM lens? Coaching and GM lens are probably somewhat well aligned. Let's use the Jets for an example in this offseason. I think it's almost always preferable to go to the draft versus the veteran markets. Brady had that huge bounce back season, was playing an MVP type of level for the last couple of years before this last season. Not going to happen necessarily all that often. Are we going to get that from Derek Carr? Are we going to get that from Jimmy Garoppolo? Are we going to get that from, I don't know, Kirk Cousins maybe available? You could get it from Aaron Rodgers. That's a possibility. But I also think the biggest motivating factor for a team like the Jets is going to be, where are we, meaning Joe Douglas and Robert Saleh, in our windows, combined with where is the team in its window? And those should generally align, right? If you're a general manager, when you're in your make or break type of season, and I think this is what's coming up for Joe Douglas here, if you're in your make or break season, it should be well aligned with the team being in its make or miss window season when it comes to the rebuild, right? You should be coming in. Maybe you're delayed by a year from starting the rebuild at most. You strip it down, you have a rough first year, and then you start building up on it. So Douglas came in 2019. So we have 2019, 2020, 2022. So 3 seasons have gone. I'm sorry, 2021, 2022. So 4 seasons have gone by here for the Jets. This will be season number 5. So Douglas is actually making it to 5, which despite, never making the playoffs so far, but we saw some improvement this year. I believe it's season 4 for Saleh. He came in There was 1 year of Douglas with old why is his name escaping me now? You know what I'm talking about though. The former Dolphins guy, the crazy dude. So both of these guys, though, in years 4 and 5 are going to need to win this season. So that's a huge motivation. For others, I don't really think it's a great idea. When we talk about like the Colts, Adam Gase, thank you. The Colts had a little bit longer of a window, yet they were rotating quarterbacks. Probably could have done better if just gone into the draft in the first place instead of doing that. The Raiders, I don't know what the Raiders are going to do this year. If they're really going to bring in Brady, that's going to be a very, very weird situation. The Panthers getting a castaway or cast off like Sam Darnold. I'm not really huge on that sort of thing. So I guess I would just always be leaning towards the benefits, because even in a situation where you have a veteran quarterback currently, like we saw with Hurts and Carson Wentz and others, you could still afford to have that rookie come in and then potentially elevate them later also. So almost always, I would say, the draft is the place to be when we're looking for this. Maybe you bring in a veteran for floor, but there's just not going to be a lot of difference when it comes to ceiling from a player like Derek Carr or another floor type of quarterback that you can bring in to make sure the bottom doesn't fall out. Make sure you don't have a situation like 2017 Browns that ended up getting Sashi Brown fired, that they just had no one there to be able to, other than Deshaun Kaiser and Kessler. What was his name? Cody Kessler. They didn't have anyone else to have a floor there. So floor is fine. You can get that cheap. Ceiling when it comes to veteran free agents, not looking so hot. Samuel also has a second question here. It says, you recently talked about the value of previous head coach hires. One takeaway could be that because you have actual data on their performance as a head coach versus projecting a coordinator, you're working with much more relevant information. How should you adjust that based on personal factors such as willingness to use information, change over time, etc.? Another way to ask this is, how much should you normalize that data based on context and likeliness to be better or worse in the future? Good question here, because as part of my Dummy's Guide to Hiring a Head Coach, I also mentioned that intellectual humility was one of the big things that they talked about. It's being good for a coach. So being willing to take in new information and change your opinion based upon new evidence. I think we've seen a lot of that from guys like Dan Campbell, who came in saying one thing when it came to being kind of a traditionalist on fourth downs and things like that. Obviously got some good information and was able to change that around a bit. Mike McDaniel, the same thing. So what I'll say is there's no perfect formula here. There are three main things. Prior performance, if it is a head coach, is more like, if you're interviewing a past head coach, it's more like table stakes. You almost have to have a record of being at least modestly successful in the past. Now, I guess you could question whether or not Bill Belichick was successful. Pete Carroll wasn't successful for the Patriots, but he was successful for USC, and that is being a head coach. Because a lot of it's just opaque. You're not going to be able to figure out what makes them successful or not. But I do think you have to rely pretty heavily on, if they were successful, there's lots of things going on there that you don't know about. Then you go to the references, and the references are the big thing of trying to piece the puzzle together. It's not just your traditional references of you call them up and you're like, give me the thumbs up or thumbs down on this guy. You're really trying to you're almost like reporting or investigating particular situations. What happened? How did they deal with players? How did they deal with these troubling situations? Did they keep their calm under these situations? Did they take in new information in situations and use it like they should have? And using all of those references is extremely, extremely important. So again, they get in the door as a previous head coach by having success in the past, but then it's the other stuff that you're really going to want to whittle it down on, because even so, there's still a lot of noise in that previous success. So unless we're talking about a Sean Payton level of candidate, it's tough to differentiate between, a Jim Harbaugh and a Frank Reich of someone in the past. They're definitely higher for me than someone like Dan Quinn, who only had really one ultra successful season with Shanahan there driving the offense. But it's a little bit more muddled as far as that's concerned. All right, this next question that I have from the subscribers here. I love this one because this is actually leading straight into some research that I'm doing that I hope to put out this week, but then I'm gonna have to move it forward to next week. A piece on Justin Herbert. So from Max, he says, "Is it too soon to start truthing Justin Herbert? He seems to be getting a pass for putting up middling efficiency in what was a fine situation this year." Okay, so I am gonna have an article on what is going on with Justin Herbert, because if you look at his adjusted efficiency, my adjusted efficiency that I do, AQE, the adjusted quarterback efficiency, I have numbers for 2021 also. He was second in 2021, behind only Tom Brady, who gets a big bump because he had a high drop rate. So he was above Mahomes, he's above Rodgers, above all these other guys. Now he's down in the middle of the pack. And he doesn't get a downward adjustment for having good circumstances, but he doesn't get an upward adjustment either. If you go through the numbers for the Chargers this year, they had a lot of injuries when it came to their offensive line. Yet again, if you look at their pass blocking, they're 17th in PFF grade. It's okay, right? I mean, it's not great. I mean, the Bears are 16th, which is interesting because everyone thinks they stink too. I might be overrating them a little bit. I also do another survival curve analysis on time to pressure. They look a little bit worse by that. So yeah, not great there. If you go to their receivers, and this is one where maybe I might be miscalculating it, but I don't really see them as having a bad receiver situation yet. If you go through the players on the team, they did miss a lot of time this year. Certain players did miss a lot of time. But Mike Williams comes in as 17th best overall score on here for the receiver ratings, according to ESPN. His open score is low, though. Like, he doesn't get open. He makes contested catches. Keenan Allen's open score, pretty good. Keenan Allen was 33rd in his open score. Josh Palmer is 33rd on there. So those guys all get in there. What about Gerald Everett? 51st. So he's not too high, but he's okay. But same as Dallas Goedert. So they had decent scores for them. Now, again, there's time missing for a lot of these guys where Palmer had to fill in a lot of the snaps where he did not have in the past. The one guy who had a tremendous amount of usage this season than he did in previous seasons was really Austin Eckler. I think that's part of the problem. So Eckler is 23rd in his open score here amongst running backs. Not that great. And he got a ton of targets. So when I started to dive into this analysis here, I looked at, number one, how much efficiency they're getting when targeting these different receivers. So Mike Williams' efficiency was down somewhat because he was injured, but still he's the highest efficiency guy to target. Keenan Allen was basically the same as his prior year. When targeted, he was just as efficient. Eckler's efficiency was through the roof when targeted in 2021, probably an unsustainable level in 2021. And then it fell dramatically in 2022. And his targets went way, way up. That was a big, big problem for efficiency of the offense. The other thing that was a problem was Joshua Palmer came in. He ended up getting a lot of targets that would have gone to, Williams, but Williams was injured all the time, would have gone to Keenan Allen. And he's just not that good. His efficiency is just not very good this year. It was lower on a per target efficiency than, and I'm taking interceptions out of here so you don't have to worry about that noise for the big negatives of interceptions. Just not that good versus the other guys. So that was a big factor. So two big factors are losing higher efficiency receivers, those targets going to Palmer, going to Austin Eckler, and somewhat of an ADOT problem. Now, the ADOT problem, I think, has been completely overhyped. The depth of target, not completely overhyped, but I think it's been overhyped. The depth of target and the Joe Lombardi, who's now gone, issue, all that sort of stuff. All of your favorite film hipsters are telling you that Justin Herbert is the truth. I think he's second in Steve Ruiz's The Ringer's quarterback rankings, below only Mahomes, despite the fact that he's about middling in his efficiency. So they all pin everything on Lombardi. There's this thing of analysts now where if they like the quarterback and the quarterback's not playing well, you just throw all the blame on someone else. So the Lombardi thing is interesting. There's some bad numbers, I would say, or some misleading numbers out there on Lombardi. Seth Galina wrote an article for PFF a while back, I think it was in 2021, where it said, we know that this is Lombardi and his short ADOT and how it's neutered other quarterbacks in the past, like Matthew Stafford. And for the numbers that he put on there, he said, okay, here was Stafford's ADOT before Lombardi got there, which was in 2014. Here's his ADOT before Lombardi got there. Here's his ADOT after Lombardi left, which was he was fired after 7 games into the 2015 season. And those are high. And then when Lombardi was there, it was a lower ADOT, and his grading was worse during that time, and it was higher during the other times with the higher ADOTs. The only problem is it's a little more complicated than just smushing all those years together. So Justin Herbert, if you look at Matthew Stafford's ADOT in 2014, the season where Lombardi coached the entire season, Matthew Stafford had 711 dropbacks that season, second most of his career. Just ridiculous numbers. That one. He had an 8.2 yard ADOT. It was 8.9 the year before. So yeah, it went down a little bit, but still 8.2. It's not like it was that low. Now the next year, 2015, it went down to 6.9. So it got really low during 2015. But remember, Lombardi was only there for 7 games. Jim Bob Cooter took over after that. Jim Bob Cooter was there for the rest of 2015. He was there for 2016, 2017, 2018. And those were actually lower ADOT years than when even Lombardi was there. And for those of us who lived through that time period, maybe some of these younger guys over at the Ringer weren't around to really be paying attention, even though we're only talking about like 6-7 years ago. Jim Bob Cooter was like the thing. 2016, Matthew Stafford, best efficiency of his career on a 7.9 yard ADOT, one of the lowest ADOTs of his career. Best efficiency, best PFF grade, everything else. So this whole correlation of like the Matthew Stafford type passers of the world, the hinting of throwing these stats out there of saying low ADOT equals low performance or low efficiency for these types of passers, sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. Obviously, like losing good receivers, only having underneath receiving options, all those sorts of things, that's not good. It's not good if you can't find open receivers down the field, and that's why your ADOT is low. But if that's part of the offensive system and how you're working things, it's not necessarily bad. But I think it's been a little bit too simplified, way more simplified than what it actually is, by just saying Joe Lombardi bad, ADOT low. Joe Lombardi bad. So I think that's been a bit overstated there. And we kind of don't know whether it's Herbert or whether it's Lombardi, or how much goes to each person for wanting this quicker attack. I think Herbert likes to get rid of the ball quickly. I think he likes to avoid sacks. He was obviously injured this year with the rib issues and injuries. They had offensive line issues. He probably wants to get rid of the ball quickly. And again, just saying Joe Lombardi had a low ADOT with Matthew Stafford does not prove that he's the one imposing such a huge low ADOT on Justin Herbert also, because Matthew Stafford continued to have even a lower ADOT after Lombardi left. And really up until Darrell Bevell got there. When Darrell Bevell got there, the ADOT flew way up when that play action based system. It was low though. 7.1 the year before Bevell got there. It was low, much lower than what it was with Joe Lombardi there. So there's that. And then there's the injury stuff that I talked about. There's the redistribution of targets. And there's also like the longer passes. While there are a smaller proportion of routes being run 20 yards down the field, there are a smaller proportion of targets 20 yards down the field. It's only marginally less. the efficiency is way down on those. I think this is more of a personnel issue than necessarily a coaching issue when it comes to this. I think not having Mike Williams there to stretch the field is a problem. I think Keenan Allen missing time and also being, frankly, old now as the two main guys, along with Josh Palmer, who, again, is not really a down the field sort of guy. Jalen Guyton missing a bunch of time actually matters. DeAndre Carter was one of the most efficient options for them, and he's just not that good. So getting like a good quality receivers who can go down and stretch the field a bit better than the options that they have would end up being much, much more beneficial. You can't just have Gerald Everett be your most explosive passing option. I also think Everett was decent, but just not nearly as good as some of the performances we saw. Even Jared Cook was pretty good in the past, and then Hunter Henry was pretty good in the past. So that's kind of how I'm wrapping everything together. I'm still going to formulate some more conclusions about exactly what to say about the situation, but it seems to be a combination of Herbert being less efficient, a little bit less accurate, injury issues, bringing down that ADOT, and something that will regress and get better this season no matter what. But we're probably cutting Herbert a little bit too much slack for his control over this and his control over adjusting so heavily to what was going on with the personnel issues that they just were spamming the ball to Austin Eckler. And that's not all screen passes. A lot of that is Herbert's probably going along with it as part of the issue, but it just really lowers the ceiling for the offense. But again, I'm going to get more into all of the Herbert stuff next week. All right, let's grab some questions here from the live stream. Who'd you recommend the Chargers hire as OC? I don't know. I know that LaFleur was out there. He got snapped up by the Rams. I tend to be a Andy Reid tree guy as opposed to a Shanahan tree guy. And I think that with a tall, high processing, I'm getting into film guy talk. I'm getting into hipster film guy talk. Sorry. Type of quarterback like Justin Herbert, you're not going to see as many benefits with that. So I don't know. I mean, they're going to be plentiful of what coaches are out there. You know who I really like a lot, who I don't think he necessarily got a great chance the last time he was in the NFL, is Todd Monken. So he's currently Georgia's offensive coordinator. I don't know, man. Like, he is a air raid type of guy. Obviously, it's a little bit more complicated than that as far as his philosophies and everything. I like that type of system for Herbert, honestly. And I just thought he was a very thoughtful dude. Supposedly, he's like crotchety and really difficult to work with. That's the story on Monken. But dude knows how to draw up an offense. Very thoughtful. He was the offensive coordinator for the Browns during the Freddie Kitchens season. The problem was, it sounded like he even talked to reporters and others, was just like, what the hell am I doing here? Because no one's listening to anything I'm saying. I'm scripting stuff early. The Browns are being successful in these early scripts. Then Kitchens just takes over and, puts me in a box, and the whole offense goes to hell over and over and over again. So how about Monken? Todd Monken. Let's do that one there. Is Tepper really an old boys network guy? I guess he's not. He did get into ownership via a minority stake with the Steelers, which is kind of how a lot of people get into it. But, what we noticed thinking about the other day, and this comes to NFL owners too. I've become a lifelong soccer Premier League fan over the last few months. And you know how they have the very gaudy, they have like the advertisements all over the place because they don't have ads during the games, right? And I was always saying, like, what if one owner, the guy's just super rich, right? What if one of the owners of one of these teams said, you know what? We're going to have a nice, clean, classic looking uniform, even though people have become a nerd to it at this point. They don't even notice it anymore. But what if they said that? They said, I'm willing to pass it up because I just want to have this sort of look. So you think like they'd have the ability to do that. But the problem is that all the other owners are like, dude, you can't do that. Because if your fans like it and then our fans start demanding it, you're taking money out of our pockets. And that that's a little bit when it comes to Tepper too, or it comes to whoever's in this network. No matter how different you may be, whether you're part of this or not, you got to go and play by the rules. Even if there's some things you might think are a little unseemly or not classy to just extract as much money as humanly possible out. If you're not doing it, then others are going to have their activities questioned, and they aren't going to like that. They're going to come down on you to make sure you get in line. So that's something to think about when you think about all these different owners here, whether or not they're really in different sort of subsets. They're all in together. Do you think there's something with Herbert like Rodgers where he is risk averse? Yeah, I think there is something with that. I do think there's something with that. Now, he did start to take more sacks at the end of the year, which, I'm kind of like an anti-sack person, but his sack rate was so low at the beginning of the year that it might have been hurting him a bit. He did take more sacks later. Maybe that helped. He was, turning over the ball. It wasn't like he's totally afraid to turn over the ball. So there might have been a little bit of issue with that. I mean, maybe the offense got stagnant too. That could have been part of the issue here, but I think there's just a lot to deal with there beyond, substitute in a new offensive coordinator and everything's going to be fixed. I think personnel is really, really the big issue there. Getting some wide receivers who can really threaten down the field, because, having Josh Palmer or Keenan Allen run 30 yards down the field is not going to help you that much. Question here from Eric. It says, there's a narrative that in order for a young quarterback to develop, they need sufficiently good surrounding talent, even a good defense. Otherwise, they will develop bad habits. Is there any evidence that this is true? Could the opposite be true? The extra challenge improves their game faster. Well, I mean, if I was going to say the first thing isn't true, I definitely would not want to lean into it improving their games faster, having those sorts of elements there. But I think there's not a lot to point to it. I think what happens is that whenever a prospect fails, we want to be able to have something to pin it on. And if it's a high prospect, there's going to be an assumption, unless there's like a work ethic sort of issue, maybe, there's going to be an assumption that, like, my opinion about this prospect being good and that he was a sure thing, when it doesn't happen, then we gotta figure out when it happened. I mean, David Carr is probably the biggest example here. When you talk about a bad surrounding talent, where he was a number 1 overall draft pick, went to the expansion Houston Texans. I believe it was their first year. Took like a jillion sacks. And then it was like he's ruined for the rest of his career. I don't know if I buy that. He played a little bit later on. He still played some games for the Giants, I think. He was still pretty bad and just took sacks. Any bad habit that can be developed can probably be undeveloped. Just remember these quarterbacks. I also think we think about their development and we totally lose view of the fact that they've been developing in some way, shape, or form for, a decade plus before they get to the NFL. It's like the the Justin Fields, should they take a quarterback in number 1? My whole article on that and discussion with that. The big thing people say is you can't develop 2 quarterbacks at the same time. You can't have 2 quarterbacks at the same time. These guys have been in quarterback competitions their whole lives. From some sort of ragtag junior high thing to going into high school, and they're always coming in the youngest, having to play behind someone most of the time. So sometimes they start as freshmen. Quarterback competition again, splitting reps in practice, doing all that sort of stuff when they get to college. And, their development is not crushed. There was an ESPN Daily podcast. I suggest you guys check it out, on Patrick Mahomes and this quarterback competition that he had with someone who ended up becoming one of his best friends growing up, where it was basically from 8th grade until junior year in high school. They didn't know if it was going to be Patrick Mahomes or if it was going to be this other guy who had a really strong arm, before Mahomes eventually took over. Now, did that stunt Mahomes' growth? Did that kill his ability to develop all those different things? No. Like, why is it so different in the NFL than anyone else? Why is it so different as far as bringing in competition, getting the best out of players, versus in the NFL wanting to just leave these quarterbacks and, you can't develop in the same time? I think development there's lots of different ways to develop, but I think the safest thing to say is that quarterbacks are good are going to be good, but then they're enhanced in certain ways. And there's certain things you can't predict, and whether or not they'll have this kind of like growth mindset or not. And that's what Mahomes seems to have had coming into the NFL, really trying to get himself better. So I don't think it's necessarily like developing bad habits or being ruined by that. I think maybe it can stunt your ability to really want to have that sort of mindset as a possibility if things are going that poorly. Seen a lot of talk about the Jets being a quarterback away like the Broncos were, but in hindsight, I don't think the Broncos were a quarterback away and the Jets aren't either. Do you have any thoughts on this? Yeah, I think it's harder to say that because normally it's reliant upon defensive performance, and then defensive performance is not as sticky year over year. I do think the Jets are young enough where they have some pieces like Garrett Wilson and Elijah Moore on offense. The quarterback away thing, though, is really problematic when we're talking about the AFC East with the Bills and the Dolphins coming up. I mean, we'll see what's going on with Tua. I heard he's still in the concussion protocol. Man, that's not good. The problem is, again, you're kind of getting more of a floor option than a ceiling option when you're bringing someone in. I know you could look at this season and say, if we had just a floor option, we'd be in the playoffs. Well, you have to assume nothing's going to go wrong. Nothing's going to get worse season over season. That's what all fan bases do, right? They say, we drafted and we had in free agency, we covered all these different holes that we had during the season. So now we're set. But not always the way it works. Kitchens was always a while higher. Okay. I believe you said this before, but looking at quarterback development through a linear lens is such a trap. Yeah, totally. Look at anything through a linear lens, even the team performance through a linear lens can be a huge trap. Or even in-season performance through that sort of lens can be a trap. All right, that's it for me, guys. I'm going to have to actually jump on into another podcast, do some gambling talk about this weekend. I appreciate everyone tuning in. If you're not, up to game on my Substack, unexpectedpoints.substack.com, please get over there. It's been successful. I mean, I was going to say be wildly successful, but I don't want to sound a little conceited there, but it's been pretty good. And actually the subscribers / paid subscribers have actually accelerated as the season's coming to an end here. So I appreciate that a lot from everyone there. It's kind of like the off season is almost my season. As far as I love getting into the off season stuff. Draft, we're going to have, we got a good relationship with grinding the mocks. If I haven't talked to us before, Benjamin Robinson, I'm going to be able to get a lot of that mock draft data. I think that's going to be some powerful stuff that I can analyze. Otherwise, appreciate everything. Drop any more, questions that you have for me that I can answer in the comments if you're on YouTube, or in the comments when I eventually post this on the Substack. Otherwise, everyone, I'll be talking to you next week. I don't have an interview lined up yet, but I'll figure out who it's going to be. But we'll get someone good for next week. But I hope you've been enjoying the interviews that I've been having going for this podcast too. Thanks so much, everybody.